God. Now, when I say that, you can't really fully be a mother without being a father. You can't fully be a father without being a mother. Well, yes, and could you be a husband without having a wife? Could you be a wife without having a husband? No. These are things that are defined with the presumption that there is that other thing. There is that other thing there. So I want that to be understood, number one. But getting back to the original point, which is that the weak party emulates or pretends to be or tries to stimulate any of the strong party. Single mothers wanting to be acknowledged on fathers, that even though they're not men and they're not fathers. It also really gives an indication of their masculine nature and the fact that many of them will eventually succumb to lesbianism due to their dysfunctional, unruly, masculine behavior and thinking. However, I would also like to provide you another analog just so that as you go through the world, you can understand the world better. For example, today you have the folks who identify as Jews, and they are mostly European in ancestry. They were my members, certainly included European, and they're very accomplished. And so what we have are some weaker groups or less accomplished groups, lower performing groups, namely Black Americans, and they'll say things like, we're the true Hebrews, we're the real Jews. Well, if that's the case, well, why don't you perform like it? Why don't you perform like the chosen people? Because currently you're not, which is to say that the weaker group tries to assume the identity of the stronger group, or they emulate the stronger group. This happens very consistently. So I want you to keep an eye out, because this is a strategy that the weak often employ. They try to steal your identity. Yes, indeed. You're getting deep today. You're getting deep today. One thing that I mentioned in passing just now is that a lot of single mothers will eventually succumb to lesbianism. And that is not that lesbianism is an ism, it is just a mere perversion. It is really them failing to make proper bonds with men in some cases because they were raised by a single mother, and they never got to see the example of their mother being led or dominated by their father. And as a result, they reject any form of patriarchy or male leadership. Or what's worse and what is common is that they suffer the unfortunate experience of sexual trauma at the hands of a male, an animal, and they begin to, rebuke and not be able to deal with males, understandably, but it's a trauma reaction. And generally what trauma does to us is it stops us from properly seeing the world. We don't see the world clearly. We don't see the truth of the matter. We're scared of all men rather than just the man who accused with the male product. That is not manly behavior. For example, with Princella, whom I had to obliterate in the debate. Unfortunately, I didn't want that to be the case. I think there's a lot of building and healing that could have been done, but in her case, I think she's really a great mascot for what I'm talking about in terms of the single mothers, A, being masculine, B, being dysfunctional, and C, eventually succumbing to lesbianism. So it's quite comical that you have a woman who has children that she birthed as a result out of intercourse with a man, which would indicate that at some level, she was responding to her proper biology and heterosexuality. And now due to her psychology, she's gone against biology and trying to escape loneliness. She's laying down with women, engaging in a very perverse, unusual type of relation. That's something that we also have to be aware of. All of this, of course, underscores the importance of fathers and manhood. But to gentlemen, I do want to caution you that A, you have to protect your seed, while B, also know that it's important to spread their seed, and to be able to find fertile soil. To plant your seed becomes increasingly difficult. Shout out to Nick Cannon. You get it done. Yeah. Yes, indeed. And there's a lot of mythology about fathers and different aspects of that. I really want to start at the beginning, which is, in that stage of becoming a father. And I also do have an article that I take you through shortly. But when we're talking about that part of becoming a father, well, we also have to consider that men grow and live lives in a position. Men need to live lives. Men are children. And men enjoy itself is problematic. But firstly, let me say one last time, men don't leave their children, they don't leave their father, their families. Men leave women. Huh? Yes, they didn't like the woman. There's something wrong with her. They had to get her out of it. She's a nut. They had to go. Now, for those of you who didn't leave, the ones who were present, they're generally doing a good thing for society, merely by being present. I want to talk a little bit about this, nuance. There's this concept of being involved in your children's life. But how about the concept of the father being present? You see, a present father is a lot of impact on his present mother. And I'll tell you what I mean. For example, if you're out in the world and it's you, your children, your child, the mother is there, the father is there, present. Let's say anything is present. Loud place, the clean Manhattan street, the clean park, where all the people in line jostling out against the front. Maybe you're boarding an airplane, people are trying to elbow by to get to the board quicker. The presence of your father gives you peace and relaxation. You feel protected, like nothing bad is going to happen to you. If for some reason something goes left, you know your father is going to be there to step forward. We know that even if your father's there and your mother's just there, she stepped forward, but there's a greater comfort in knowing that your father stepped forward, he could be effective. Whereas if your mother stepped forward, she probably just get ragdolled. You feel me? So the father just really being present gives a level of confidence, level of certainty, level of peace, not only to the child, but also to that woman. One of my previous lives, I mentioned two clear observations I made as a youth. My mother, a single mother, when I would be at her home, she would keep a golf club behind the door, which we all know she would have been woefully incompetent in wielding it. She'd keep a hammer under her bed. All because she knows that she's physically inadequate to combat any real threats. She's living in fear because she's essentially a single mother, or I would say lonely mother. Conversely, I would spend pretty much every weekend, and no less than every other weekend at my uncle's house, a nuclear family. And Aunt Leslie, she lived in peace and comfort. She never had to have a golf club behind the door or a hammer under the bed. Why? She has Uncle Jimmy. She don't have to worry about a thing. Something pops off, Uncle Jimmy's going in. She's just gonna stay in bed, wait till it's all over. She doesn't have to live in perpetual fear, discomfort. Her mind can be at rest, not stress. The single mother is perpetually stressed. And what does she do? She does the disservice of passing that stress onto her children. Ooh, it's unpleasant. So what does it feel like to be an 8-year-old child with the stresses of a 30-year-old woman? What does it feel like to be a 7-year-old boy with the stress of a 40-year-old woman? Yes. You wonder why these children grow up so resentful, whether they're male or female, so resentful, dysfunctional, and mentally unwell. So understand that the presence of a male, before he said a word, before he's paid the bill, before he's done anything, just the presence of a man in the child's life and in the woman's life, the father, the patriarch, is itself powerful. Now we have to consider this whole ideology around participation and involvement. And there's a lot of perversity here. We get into this unnatural game in which the left and the matriarchy, they attempt to make the male and the female the same, which is to say that mom spends this amount of time or engages with this level of closeness and intimacy and affection, that father should do the same thing. Mom is emotive. Father should also be emotive. Kissy, kissy, huggy, I love you, and you're my favorite, you're the bestest in the world. Well, this is not reality, biologically speaking, and this was not the design of the human species. I'll tell you why. When the child is very young, the child is little more than an animal until it's refined with good parenting, civilized, it becomes civilized through training and conditioning. When it's uncivilized, it's more like one of the lower animals. You might say maybe a cat or a dog, right? And you ever notice that women really like pets and furry things and cute things? Yes, they're conditioned for that. That's their, or rather not conditioned, that's innate in them. And the child is just like a furry little animal, in as much as it doesn't know much until we put the knowledge and we train it in discipline. The female is good for that, especially in the early years of the child. It's more when a woman is pregnant, she releases a chemical called oxytocin, which is bonding chemical. The male does not experience any such thing. Which is to say that the male does not experience a chemical bonding for the child, or of course the male has another effect. Furthermore, what we understand is that the woman is an natural body of sustenance, and as much as the child features the very body, the milk, the breast, etc. After metaphor, the woman has eggs, and she provides the food very well. And so that indicates that the mother always has to be near the child when the child is in early age. The mother has to be near to provide the breast milk. The mother is always keeping an eye on the child, which makes sense, and it turns out that women are much more detailed than they can see a higher, greater spectrum of color and hear a greater spectrum of frequency, which makes them better at interpreting and understanding the child who does not speak English and murmurs and might show her bird, and she doesn't anticipate these things, and she's more attuned to the child. This is perhaps the closest thing you call feminine intuition, where the male either doesn't have it or doesn't know it, it's not exposed to the child, and they use it, it's not even necessary, it's not even appropriate. Most of us don't even have the skill to engage with the child, if they would hear the fun of it. If we did, for some reason, want to act like a mom did, and then be in the child's face at a early age, and eventually the child will start crying, we don't have a solution. Why? Because the child is literally crying out for its mother. Why? Because its mother has two big milk-filled jugs attached to her very body, which inherently connects the child closer to the mother in early childhood. Is it a coincidence that males don't feel the instinct to be so involved hand to hand with a child at an early age? No, it's not a coincidence. It's biology, and it's right. I mean, it's biology. It's life. But these leftists and feminists and these degenerates who weren't raised with two parents and don't actually understand the nature of the opposite sex, they just think everything needs to be even Steven against biology and against reality. And then so you start to count hours. Well, has dad spent as many hours with the kid as mom has? Probably not, because dad is the one you call the provider. Don't you have to go to work to provide? Dad is the one we call the protector. The mother has the same position as the child, which is the one that's taken care of. Now, another thing we need to consider is the number of hours. Does it really have impact? And are these studies being considered to establish this idea that the number of hours invested is so critical? You might say, well, when you're talking about, of course, investing more time with your kids is going to be good at it. I think that's mostly right. But the nature of the hours and also what you're competing against has changed radically over time. This is what I mean. Here's a study that I'll go through. I've actually not previewed this one bit because I knew it was quite a suspicious study just from the time period that we chose to look at. This notes fathers spend 7 times more with their children than in the 1970s. Well, this is important to understand. The 1970s is after the 1960s cultural revolution, which is when American culture first started to unravel. We had too many voices in popular media, etc. And they were leading the culture in various ways. People were becoming confused, whereas before the 1960s, say the 1950s and earlier, you would have what some might call conformist culture, where people wore suits, men wore dark suits, they spoke in downtown with certainty. Women always like to look good, they're very feminine, and they mind their manners and their speech, and they would like to be a homemaker or a good wife as a priority. They would work until they had children, and the American dream was a real thing, and being an American means a certain set of values. this all unraveled in the 1960s. It was a cultural revolution, a political revolution. It was many things. So when they're looking at the amount of time spent with children versus the 1970s, I think it's an interesting time period because, post 1960s, the question is not only, well, are they spending time with kids, but what are you imparting upon the kids when you do spend time with them, and what are the roles that the male and female are inhabiting when they interact with the kids now that they have more time, and most importantly, what is the schooling system and the society teaching the kid? Because always the parent is at some level competing with the society because we're not a homogenous society. For example, I was Pakistani, and we were all in, Islamabad. Hopefully that's in Pakistan. Hopefully I'm sure. I think we're all in Islamabad, and we're all Sunni Muslim, and we all come from the same tribal group. Well, I'm not in war against the society to impart my values because the immediate society we're the same ethnicity, we speak the same language, we're the same folk, there's more, religion, language, everything around me is here is what I want. So I'm not going to society. Diversity in America, is not going to society. Diversity is dangerous and bad for many things. Because diversity has created options, it's created bad options, it's created people who use freedoms to excess in damaging ways that hurt themselves and hurt others. And so whereas before it might be a case of, well, what's your religion? Are you a Protestant or a Catholic or maybe Jehovah's Witness? Then it becomes, okay, well, what do you believe? Do you believe in religion, or are you an atheist? Do you believe in astrology, or are you such as Justin Bieber? Is Bieber your religion? And so the multitude of choices the human being starts to seek to be an individual and unique. We do weird things now because we've lost our way, this culture is broken down. We've shunned conformity when in reality, most of us want to be led and ruled. Absolutely, we want to be led and ruled. That's actually far more natural than democracy. I mean, look at the voting numbers. Most people don't vote in mass to go vote. They don't want to make a decision, and they know that they're not informed. And when they do make a decision, it's from pure emotion. I mean, how comical is it that people get angry about the claim that Donald Trump is racist, as though that makes him unique among American presidents? We come from a land of slave holding. I mean, this is silliness. Anyways, so the point is that the presence of the Father is critical, especially the Father is a proper masculine man. And it is important to consider that if you have a father who's weak and effeminate, he might be doing more damage being present than being absent. But generally speaking, the presence of the Father is critically important, and also he needed to be involved at the same level as the female. It's not appropriate and not necessary for the healthy rearing of a child. Though the instinct of the unrefined female, especially the wicked woman of today, is to complain and exaggerate. She complains about the absence of the father's involvement, even if he is involved, and then she tends to exaggerate on how little time she has, which is why she needs him to be part of her job as a mom. Well, how is the job so hard to do here when women in the 1950s, they didn't have a washing machine, in some cases they had to use a washing board. They didn't have a microwave, in some cases they had to cook their food. And so I think that you can do in automated quick meal, the right kind of box to get it done. Women in the 1950s, they were to get it done, by taking out the time, they still didn't have so many complaints. You did why? Expectation, and you was their role and responsibility. Whereas women today, they have a washing machine, but somehow they complain, so it's difficult to drop clothes into a box and press a button. They have a microwave, they have Uber Eats, they have a dishwasher, you wash dishes. I mean, it's like, what's taking so much of your time, though? And I can't tell you how many folks that see hashtag moms or TikTok, when in reality there shouldn't be any moms on TikTok, because most of them are over the hill and under traffic anyways. I mean, nobody on there sexually exploiting yourself, even though you might be objectified. The true lunacy of the female in this day is just, it's hard to deal with, and it only underscores the fact that men have failed. Yes, we allow them to be out of control at this level. And this is a low, low level. Yeah, I acknowledge those who are supporting work. I really appreciate it. Shout out to P. It's good to see you again. Shout out to Paul. You guys Peace of the Saints. I also acknowledge Mr. Wilcox, your tuition and appreciation for education. Yes, sir. And I also acknowledge Nick, who writes tuition message in the chat. And if anyone sees Nick's message, you can go ahead and repost it if you this was before I do. Yes, indeed, like I said, that's the real thing right there. All right, I'm going to scroll to the bottom. See what your question is. There's something that also makes question right now, be thankful while that is happening. And if I acknowledge Zachary, who I was saying what I owe, he's the same tool case for replay. And this is the real Zachary, you're not the weird one that came in the last time. Shout out to the press, 1177, for the word, as well as all of them by Peace of Saints. What's the best way to guide a little sister into a traditional feminine future instead of career-driven feminists? She just graduated high school, wants to move in with her boyfriend. He's lonely. Oh, wow. That's unfortunate. Well, Paul, I must concede that we are a bit late to the game for children are really developing their core values by what they see, hear, experience, and learn, and what they're trained on during the Carnegie Foundation called Thomas Years. We're talking about 7 years old, 8 years old. We're about a decade too late to this party. But the best thing you can do is share good information. I think that she's an adult at this point, and so you just have to show her love and when possible, driven a little bit of information. But I highly recommend that you engage in Socratic questioning. You might be able to help her see the light, and we will all be wishing her the best. I want this to be a warning to all of you all. Maybe she'll just say a heads up that we must start early. By the time a flower has bloomed, it is a bit too late to start saying, "Oh, we need to water." That bloom, the quality of the bloom is going to be decided by how you nourish that seed over time. A human being is a work that takes time. She has been with this vehicle almost 2 years in France of life. Very good. Their goal is to both work and do school full time. He's only 19. Okay, fair enough. These are reasonable things at this time. There is nothing that is sounds bad. The idea that she would move with him and his lonely mother is peculiar, in as much as that's already a broken family. She's joining in on something that's not properly led. And there's already impractical structure there, as much as there's no patriarch in the household. And she's joining in on a household where her patriarch, who led with her boyfriend, is underneath his mother. And even for your mother to respect you as a man, you have to move out of the house in return. You see, my mother never really had to. See, I left my house young. I left my house when I was very young. And so my mother was able to respect me as a man very quickly, very early on. Versus my brother, we didn't leave until he was like pretty much in his mid-20s and went to the army. So that being the case, there was never this acknowledgement of him being an independent man who could stand on his own too. It's like he went from the matriarchy and oversight of the mother to the government being his parents, his mom. So you got to leave your house and come back for your parents to respect you as a man. It's almost like a rite of passage in some ways. Just to give you a dramatic example, we watched that film 300. They cast out the young boy into the wilderness almost. And he has to encounter a beast and subdue the beast, which is a metaphor for going out on your own, experiencing a challenge, overcoming it, and then returning to your people, returning to your home. But those who have not left their home, they've not been battle tested, especially as men, they want to be battle tested. So the idea that she moved into a broken home, essentially, I think is a bad idea. And she's going to be even more dynamic, which won't make college easier. Universities have 50% fail rate. So Sean said, indeed, he writes, you have taught countless saints the foundations of masculinity that our fathers should have taught us. Thank you for all that you do